Facts number 1. Crucifixion. Starting off this macabre list is crucifixion. This was practiced both in the ancient world and as recently as the 20th century. It was first introduced by the Assyrians and Babylonians, followed by the Persians, Alexander the Great, and the Phoenicians, who initiated it in Rome in the 3rd century BC. Crucifixion involved being tied or nailed to a wooden beam, or cross. Nails were pierced through the bones below the wrists to bear the weight of the person. The feet were nailed to the vertical part of the cross, and once the legs weakened, the arms had to hold up the body, resulting in the shoulders being pulled from their sockets. Facts number 2. Rat torture. Rat torture is right up there when it comes to one of the worst ways to go. The thing about rats is that they eat through anything. Thus, it comes as no great surprise that humans made a torture device out of them in the ancient world. Typically, a rat was placed inside a small cage positioned against the victim's abdomen. The cage was heated from the outside, either by a candle, flaming stick, or hot coals, causing the rat to become agitated. So, how could it escape? By clawing its way into the only available soft surface, human skin. Quite quickly, the rat would gnaw its way into the victim's bowels, eliciting unbearable agony in the process. This technique effectively got information out of prisoners and played on their psyches, adding a psychological element to the torture. Facts number 3. The rack. Another brutally famous torture device in the ancient world was the rack. It involved a table, usually wooden, with axles and levers at both ends. The victim was forced to lay down, after which leather straps, belts bound their wrists and heels. The straps had chains or ropes tied to them, which wound over the axles. One or several torturers would then slowly push the levers, causing the axles to rotate and produce tension in the chains. This caused the straps to dig into the prisoner's skin and gradually stretched their body outwards. Facts number 4. The wheel. Next up is a means of torture beyond excruciating. The wheel, also known as the execution wheel, breaking wheel, or Catherine wheel. This commonly used ruthless contraption in the ancient world was reserved for public executions. There are variations on the practice, but generally, the prisoner was tied to a large, wooden, spoked wheel. The goal was not to kill them but severely mutilate them, with the executioner starting with breaking the leg bones and then working their way up. They would do this via an iron bar, beating the victim to near death, crushing all their bones, and bludgeoning them. Once finished, the now ghastly maimed prisoner would be repositioned on the wheel so that their heels came together at the back of their neck. They were left that way to bleed to death. Facts number 5. Impalement. At the halfway point on this list is the grotesquely graphic practice of impalement. Many civilizations and cultures practiced this ancient world form of torture. It involved impaling the victim with a long, sharp, and often greased stake for either capital punishment, to subdue revolts, to reprimand defectors, or wipe out military insubordination in war. This method was done in 2 ways: longitudinal or transversal. For longitudinal, the person was positioned above the spike, which was inserted partway up their rear privates. As gravity took hold, the spike would run them through, avoiding major organs and exiting through the skin of their shoulder or neck. A person could survive this for several days. For transversal, the stake was instead pierced through the torso, either from front to back or vice versa. Facts number 6. Blood eagle. If the 6 other ancient world ways to die have not made you squirm yet, welcome to the barbaric practice of the blood eagle. Although it is highly debated whether this torture method was real or just a literary invention, either way, a rather disturbed mind concocted it. The blood eagle ritual was first mentioned in late skaldic poetry. The victim would lie in a prone position and be kept alive as their back was sliced open, their ribs were detached from their spine, and their lungs pulled through the opening to form a pair of bloody wings. It is hard to imagine one staying conscious long enough for this to be completed. Facts number 7. Molten gold. Earning its 3 spot is the almost unbelievable execution method of drinking molten gold. This was potentially practiced more often than documented, especially on both sides of the Atlantic Oceans, by the Romans and the Spanish Inquisition. The technique is self-explanatory. The victim would be restrained, and their mouth forced open as heated gold was poured down their throat. The result would be severe damage to distal organs and the blistering of the lungs, ultimately leading to immediate death. Facts number 8. Flaying. This next torture method almost takes the top spot because of its sadistic modus operandi. Flaying, or skinning, was perhaps the most painful of all ancient world execution methods because of its slow process. The victim was first stripped, and their hands and feet bound to stop any movement. After this, the executioner would begin peeling away the individual's skin with a sharp blade, often starting with the head, as this area would inflict the most suffering due to the victim still being conscious. In some instances, parts of the person's body were even boiled to make the skin softer and easier to remove. There were a few ways one could die from flaying: shock, blood or fluid loss, hypothermia, or infection. The time of death could also be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. Facts number 9. The Roman candle. Above all other brutal ways to die in the ancient world is the Roman candle. Whether it is the execution style itself or the executioner who ordered it, this is bone-chilling on several fronts. History is filled with ruthless and psychopathic figures, and the Roman ruler, Nero, is one of them. He hated Christians so much that he used them as human candles, or torches, for his garden parties. First, the victims were tied and nailed to tall stakes. Then, flammable liquid was poured over them before they were set alight. The fire started at the feet to prolong their suffering. Whether the Christians had rebelled against the state or not, this was a monstrous way to go. It reflects how barbaric punishments were in antiquity and how they were often born of man's vicious ego and thirst to dominate what he considered a lowlier populace. Facts number 10. The Judas Cradle. The terrifying torture device known as the Judas Cradle is evidence of the heinous creativity of those who tried to cause their victims agony and misery. Its use as a means of punishment and coercion to extract confessions dates back to the medieval and early modern eras. The Judas Cradle victim would be forced into an uncomfortable and dangerous position. Usually, a pointed, pyramid-shaped wooden or metal contraption with its tip pointed toward their genitals or anus was hung above them. Often with their hands and feet bound, the victim was gently lowered onto the pyramid's pointy tip. The victim was enduring unbearable pain and discomfort. As the weight of the body bore down on the sharp point, it caused deep penetration and injuries. Any movement or struggle would only make the victim's condition worse. Therefore, any attempts to relieve the pain would only make it worse. The Judas Cradle's design ensured prolonged torment, as the victim's body weight and fatigue intensified the pain.